What's going on YouTube? It's your boy Jeremy Wormy, and I have some troubling news and interesting news because we've been talking a lot of companies getting involved with DEI, trying to obfuscate their involvement with DEI and all of this nonsense that's been going on here in the West. And if you can't already tell, I'm a big fan of anime. I'm a major fan of Gundam, and one of my favorite companies out there has actually been Bandai, mainly because they are the people that own the rights to Gundam. So when I see news like this, I get concerned. Bandai Namco Online shares views on DEI and implementation in Western releases of Japanese games. Now, this is a little bit of a weird situation that's been going on here. Somewhat because a lot of their information is coming from a debunked survey that wasn't super scientific, that we can't actually get information from. But on top of that, they're already kind of showing that they don't really believe in this DEI nonsense at all, or at least iterations of the DEI that we are being given here in the West. But as we continue on, at Japan's CEDEC 2024 Computer Entertainment Developers Conference, Bandai Namco Online held a seminar on the topic of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in games, particularly Japanese titles aiming for overseas expansion, as reported by 4Gamer. Bandai Namco Online is a Bandai Namco HD subsidiary that develops and distributes online games. Up until 2023, the company mostly produced Japan and Asian exclusive titles, but has recently moved towards targeting Western audiences as well. Specifically, they developed MMORPG Blue Protocol and Gundam Evolution, now discontinued with overseas expansion in mind. Yeah, Gundam Evolution, that was a bad idea. But let's take into account what they just pointed out there, Blue Protocol. Blue Protocol is actually a video game that's being distributed by Amazon. And when I come over here to this questlog.gg, it actually goes over the censorship that has been going on with Blue Protocol and what Amazon has been doing with this game. Amazon censorship in Blue Protocol, a critical analysis. And you can see body types and clothing being changed. You have face-off over face options, Amazon's quest for Western appropriateness. Like, Amazon's already going through this game with a fine-tooth comb and censoring it for its Western release. Then when you come back over here, you see these things going on, you go like, you guys are doing some censorship of all this stuff, but it gets a little bit more complicated because I think they're being sold a bill of goods that is not something good to be seeing over there. Against this background, the company has, according to their quality assurance engineer, come to place importance on DEI. It seems Bandai Namco Online first became aware of DEI through feedback received from overseas partner companies. Oh, that's right, guys. And you see the story all the time. Western companies come over to you and say, hey, you know what? DEI is super important. You know, it'd be important to start focusing in on all this diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. It's good. Western audiences love this stuff. And they just ignore the fact that Western audiences actually hate this stuff and will more than likely champion stuff that will not push this ideology on them. But they don't see that evidence because they usually get sold a false bill of goods, utilizing false surveys and false scientific studies that don't accurately explain how they got to their conclusions and such stuff like that. And we'll be going over one of those studies here in just a little bit because it doesn't make logical sense. Based on the contents of the seminar, Bandai Namco Online currently sees DEI, when used correctly, that's a key word there, as a potential method to broaden the scope of their content and make it attractive to a wider range of players. Now, that's the bill of goods that a lot of companies were always sold when it comes to DEI. They get sold, hey, if you do this, you'll hit a wider market. You'll appeal to more audiences. You'll appeal to everybody, not just one group of people. And they ignore the fact that you can't appeal to everybody. There's no physical way to appeal to all these individuals all at once. People will always find something deplorable, something just unacceptable, and kowtowing to these individuals isn't the correct method. A lot of people fail to realize, especially over in Japan and the East as a whole, that what is very appealing to their products, whether it's anime, whether it's manga, whether it's mangua, what have you, even with Black Myth Wukong as a good example. It's the fact that it's from another culture. It's focused on developing a property for said culture and isn't trying to pander to them and is just focusing in on giving good product first. Those are the important things. But people do come to these companies say, hey, if you do DEI, you can appeal to a wider market. You can appeal to more people. You can get more money. And that's the false bill of goods. But I do think they're taking this more from the false bill of goods aspect than the actual, BlackRock, Blackstone, State Street, that kind of aspect of all this. On the topic of the actual relevance of DEI in the West, they cite a survey conducted by Newszoom in which 55% of respondents from the US and UK agreed either strongly or somewhat to the question, is DEI important to you? And I actually have this whole study pulled up here. Now, I was mentioning, people get sold these bill of goods based off of faulty studies and faulty information, that they don't properly cite how they got to these conclusions. They just say, hey, we have these conclusions. You better run with this. Now, I don't think I actually did a video on this study that came out relatively recently, and I just kind of threw it aside because I didn't think people would actually recognize the study as actually being legitimate, because they do give you this whole area right here of gamer sentiment study on diversity and inclusion. And when you click this, oops, page not found. So I don't even know what was properly asked of these people. I can't double check the ways they got to their conclusions and all this. I don't know how they got this information, but that's the key takeaway in all this. I don't know, because a lot of these people that try to say, hey, we're going to study these diversity and all this stuff in gamers and see what their opinions on gamers are, they usually give front-loaded questions to a lot of these people. Plus, they actually won't get a proper representation of what a gamer truly is. And they'll throw in people that like to do mobile gaming and say, well, you play Candy Crush a bunch of times, you're a gamer. They'll ignore all that. So when you do scroll down here and you see, this whole representation and breakdowns of individuals right here, it kind of comes off as being very disingenuous, because I don't know who's playing what. I don't know any of the questions that were being asked except for the ones that they try to sell you on and say that these are the correct answers and this is what people should be actually focusing in on, especially when you scroll down here and see that people want them to be taking stances on political issues. I find that highly sus. But when you see stuff like that going on, that gives more credence to the idea of the false bill of goods, and that they are being told all this stuff and saying that this is a better way to go with your company, instead of recognizing that it's actually probably the dumbest thing you could possibly do for a company. They also cite a survey result that showed the American and British gamers tend to project themselves onto game characters, which again, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't seem natural at all. Yes, a lot of gamers actually do like to, customize their characters, make them look a certain way, have fun. But when you actually sit down and think about that, customizing characters hasn't been around for very long in the grand scheme of things. And for the longest time, gamers were just playing things like Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, things of that nature, where they couldn't actually project themselves onto these characters. So they would go around just playing as Mario and stuff and being able to identify with Mario, being able to identify with Link, being able to identify with Red or Blue, depending on which version of the game you actually got and played. They were able to identify with those individuals, and they weren't, trying to customize this character that looks just like them. And even then, when it comes to customizing a character, a lot of people don't really look like their characters one little bit, and saying, well, they like to put themselves in the character and identify as the character and make their character look just like them and be them. It's like, no, that's not reality. That's not anything natural. That this doesn't feel right. More gamers actually like to use video games as an escape, so they'll make hyper masculine characters, hyper feminine characters. A lot of men like to play as women, so on and so forth. This is an entire thing because they're just using it as a way to escape reality while they play a fun game. In this sense, the DEI Bandai Namco Online are exploring seems to revolve around things that include more diverse hairstyles, which, by the way, that's a very dumb thing to say. They usually mention like dreads and things like that. Black people weren't the only group of people that had dreads. Nordic individuals had dreads. Tons of people had dreads. It wasn't just diverse hairstyles, it's just hairstyles. Facial features and body types to character creation, as well as making NPCs more diverse in appearance and age. Not a good sign, but again, it just seems like they want to widen their character market, add in different individuals here or there. It's a whole thing there. It's not a good sign, but it continues on, and it does kind of become a little bit more. Hey, they're actually taking like the real idea of maybe diversity and the real idea of, hey, just give more character customization to players and let them go on and do their own little thing. It seems like they're taking that route instead of the whole woke propaganda that you see in like Concord or Dustborn. They also seem to consider accessibility options to be part of DEI. As part of the seminar, lauds the efforts of recent Japanese fighting games like Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 in making their controls more accessible. Now, for those of you that might not be aware of what they did in Street Fighter, and I know this just a little bit mainly in Street Fighter, I don't know what they did in Tekken. They made it so that a lot of your combos were no longer like, or up, down, 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 B, 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 X, Y, whatever, to put out a like a decent combo. It was, hey, press X repeatedly, press Y repeatedly, do something very simple and easier. But they did have a way to, if you're going to go that route, your attacks aren't going to do as much damage. But they also allowed you to cycle between either one. Either you can go that easier route, or you could do the whole finger contortionist method of fighting games. That's actually an example of good accessibility and an example of introducing players to the game in a unique way and making it not so hard for them, but it does give you a drawback and damage output. Interestingly, Bandai's presenter admits to initially questioning whether DEI is really necessary in game content, and they stress that being excessive and pursuing diversity can harm a game's setting and come off as performative. That's a key takeaway here on why it goes to this whole, they're not fully committing to DEI here. They're talking about DEI in the actual like idea of diversity and making stuff more open to players, making stuff more accessible to players, giving players more customization, and introducing games to a different market of players. That's where this is coming from, because the whole performative, because you can't be, forcing this stuff. You can't be doing this stuff all the time. It doesn't feel right in some of these settings. It doesn't feel natural. And the example that they give is actually really telling. They give the example of a game set in rural Japanese school where half of the students are foreigners. Yeah, you wouldn't see that. You wouldn't go to a rural Japanese school and see a bunch of black kids, a bunch of white kids, a bunch of Mexican kids. That's not natural. You wouldn't see that. Heck, even in the cities, you might see one foreign kid. You're not going to see all the other foreign kids all throughout the rural areas. So when you take that into account, that's what they're saying with a lot of this stuff. They're being very cautious and actually very correct in their approach to this diversity thought process and this idea of being more customizable and more representative of actual gamers. But they're going about it through DEI, so that tells you that they were sold something that isn't true. And it's showing that this is a seed in its early stages where, yes, they're doing actual smart moves. They're doing actual like, hey, this is an okay thing to do. They're not, they're pushing the boundary, but they're like, hey, this isn't a big deal. This is an okay thing. But the problem is this seed takes hold 5 years later when their company has now become a whole lot like Ubisoft, has become a whole lot like Naughty Dog and all Concord and all these other areas in which their games are garbage. Everything about it is annoying and people are rejecting it because they're tired of this bull crap. It's in its early stages, and calling it out now is the correct method to making sure that it doesn't continue onwards. The company seems to be proactively raising the staff's understanding of DEI topics like gender and cultural differences through in-house training, which again, early stages, this is okay thing in the start, but as it develops, it becomes red flags up the wazoo. But also stresses that they are not introducing any kind of binding policy on the developers. They also mentioned doing research on Japanese games that have performed well in the West without making specific efforts towards implementing DEI, which suggests the developer may still be in the process of forming an answer. The key thing here is like the examples they gave, okay? The things that they gave you greater access to character customization, maybe introducing different characters, like different ages of characters, different races of characters, depending on the setting. That's another part. Depending on the area, that's another aspect. And just, playing around with the stuff when it comes to the accessibility. For example, they're using examples of Street Fighter and Tekken, which I already went through that. That's some good things to be taken into account, and actually introduces new gamers, younger gamers to your game, and convinces them that, hey, maybe it would be a good idea to actually learn how to properly play said game and not just take the easy road the entire time. The scary thing is they are hedging their bets on what Western developers are saying right now, Western partners are saying, and this bogus survey that doesn't even tell you what they asked players, doesn't even tell you like the percentage of players that they actually took from, and doesn't really give you any information. That's the scary stuff here. What we're seeing here is a perfect example of the early stages of actual DEI implementation, and what can easily be seen as good intentions that can quickly spiral out of control and destroy a company from the inside. When it comes to Bandai Namco, yeah, they put out tons of games that I like. They put out tons of properties that I like. They're in charge of Gundam. How well did Gundam Witch of Mercury do? I just gotta be upfront and honest. That was not a good anime. That anime was just an all around horrible thing, and it hurt. It hurt me as a Gundam fan to watch that and to go through that. That was not a fun anime, and that was a bad time. When it came to that, Bandai Namco actually again had this more altruistic thought process and had this idea of, hey, we need to be targeting younger audiences. You've been seeing Bandai go down this early stages of DEI, early thought process of early things, and injecting all this stuff because they think what they're doing is the correct move, and they're not seeing the return on investment the way they think they are. I don't know what's going to ultimately happen with Bandai Namco. All I'm going to say is keep a good long eye out, and what could potentially happen 5 years down the road is we watch as Bandai Namco basically becomes just the next Ubisoft, the next Bethesda, the next garbage company that's pushing out Concord. Who knows where this is all going to lead us, but I'm going to leave it there. Let me get you guys' thoughts on all this down in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell for every time I put out a new video live, guys, and I'll see you all on the next one. Bye for now.